for another episode of Boxing News Today. And of course, there is big news and big mouths screaming that big news across the boxing world. We're still waiting for confirmation of the Tyson Fury Alexander Usyk anticipated fight in Saudi Arabia. We expect that the date will be February 17th, but both Queensbury and Riyadh Season have not confirmed it yet, and we'll hold a press conference later on. But look for February 17th on your calendars if you're inclined to see that Tyson Fury Alexander Usyk heavyweight fight that was supposed to take place December 23rd. That has in fact been replaced by this fight. What was it called? I was thinking they actually branded it as something. Oh, Day of Reckoning. Right. Quite a few mismatches, but nonetheless, I'll read it out to you. Deontay Wilder versus Joseph Parker. Anthony Joshua versus Otto Wallen. Now, we all would have liked to have seen Deontay Wilder fight Anthony Joshua without a doubt, but it is what it is. Dimitri Bivol versus Lyndon Arthur, which I talked about the other day. Daniel Dubois versus Jarrell Miller, who I will talk about in a second. Frank Sanchez versus Junior Fa. Jay Opetaya versus Alex Zorro. Philip Hrgovic versus Mark Demori. And Arslanbek Makhmudov versus Ajit Kabayel. And Makhmudov is the... Okay, I wouldn't mind. Okay, whatever. I'm looking forward to the Makhmudov fight. I really want to see him... he will clobber Ajit Kabayel, but I want to see some other clobbering getting on. And according to Jarrell Miller, he's going to be doing some clobbering. He's been quite vocal, I got to say. And this is quite humorous to hear what he had to say at the press conference in Saudi Arabia. In a post interview done on television, Jarrell Miller does not hold back in expressing his disdain for both Anthony Joshua and his promoter, Eddie Hearn. Miller also talked about his upcoming fight with Daniel Dubois. So, with respect to Anthony Joshua, this is what he got to say. Oh, yeah, he's a punk. You got to understand, when somebody's a punk and he's so used to everybody kissing his ass, it's easy to rile him up. In my school, people talk shit growing up all the time. It's kind of brushed off. But with him, when you're a sucker, you're a posh. It's easy getting under a guy's skin like that when you run into a real deal bully like me. You can't take it, and that's what happens every time. And guess what? If it was a street fight, I'd whoop his ass even twice as worse if I was in the boxing ring. So he doesn't want that, those problems. Trust me. Eddie Hearn, this is what he has to say about Eddie Hearn. We had a brief talk. You know what I'm trying to say. I'll tell you, if you want to say something to me, you can say it to my face, says Miller. You don't get to go on camera and then be disrespectful, take things behind my back, and when in front of my face, you play that nonchalant. You know what I mean? But he has that hypocritical attitude about Eddie Hearn. You can watch a lot of his interviews. So let's see what happens after this fight. And maybe one day we have to bump into each other. If not, I'm going to hit Eddie with a body shot sooner or later. He does go on to express his opinion about how he will deal with Daniel Dubois, which, quite frankly, he simply says, I'm surprised, like I said before, Chisora was the original guy. They reached out to me and said, I said, hell yeah. And when he said no, I told you, Chisora, take the damn fight. But Dubois stepped up. But I really believe that people in Daniel Dubois' corner made him take this fight, and it's a bad call because I'm going to whoop his ass. Now, remember, he's not exactly an inspiration among young boxers. After all, he was caught with let's call them drugs in his body a few years ago when he was set to fight Anthony Joshua. So with all that aside, Tony Bellew over in the UK was quick to point out that Jarrell Miller, he's a big fat baby, said Bellew. Wait till you see Jarrell's lips start moving. He's going to end Dubois verbally. Daniel Dubois could not keep up with Jarrell Miller verbally, but I hope Daniel Dubois shuts him down because we need Jarrell Miller away from the sport. Somebody has to say it. This guy has more drugs in him than the Incredible Hulk. Okay. And reverting back to Miller, Frank Warren had this to say. They're all being tested by the VADA, and he is licensed in Nevada. That's he being Miller. And if anyone fails the test, they won't fight. So that was according to Frank Warren of Queensberry Promotions, who's put all this together along with Eddie Hearn, which was quite a surprise. But it seems like not only have Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn buried the hatchet, so to speak, but so has Deontay Wilder, who was looking forward to fighting Anthony Joshua and is still hoping to fight Anthony Joshua sometime in the new year, 2024. So with the feud between Eddie Hearn and Deontay Wilder apparently all cleaned up now, there might be some talks going on between a possible contest between Wilder and Anthony Joshua. So he says this is wilder than Wilder. If you know the history, then you know what's understood. Don't have to be explained. I will title this picture, and he has some picture of him and Eddie Hearn online. Old endings for a new beginning. Finally, the boxing fans will get what they've always wanted for years for. The only thing that stands in the way now is December 23rd. So he's obviously enjoying his moment in the spotlight. Coming up very shortly, there's going to be a big clash between Shakur Stevenson and Edwin De Los Santos. We're all looking forward to that, with Stevenson, as you know, often saying he's the most avoided boxer currently. But on that undercard, you're also going to see someone you might not have heard of, but he's a rising Australian heavyweight named Jackson Murray. Look out for this fella, okay? 6'7" brawler from New South Wales. He's going to be fighting the American Stephen Torres on that undercard, taking place in Las Vegas. So merely my opinion, but look out for this fella. He looks good. Let me say that name again. Jackson Murray, heavyweight. Let's move over to WBA, WBC, WBO welterweight champion Terence Crawford, no longer holding that IBF title. Says his next fight against Errol Spence will be 145 rather than 154. But he's not sure about a date because Showtime will no longer be broadcasting boxing events after this year. The way Crawford's talking, he's interested in a rematch with Spence taking place at 147, obviously, which would give him an advantage because Errol has outgrown the division and arguably should be campaigning 160. If he's going down in weight from 190, 154 would be torture, says the boys at boxingnews24.com. It makes sense for Crawford to drain Spence down to 147 because that will enable him to look great in the rematch, which would help him get a fight with Canelo Alvarez. That's the one Crawford really wants. And beating a drained Spence again emphatically increases the chance of Canelo giving him a shot at his 468-pound titles. Now, Crawford had to fight someone young, talented, and not weight drained. His chance of looking like 24 gold would be less. Hence, Crawford is showing zero interest in fighting the newly elevated IBF welterweight champ, Jaron Boots Ennis, who I think would beat Crawford. Terrence's fans aren't sympathetic to Spence's issues. Some say he was a weight bully all those years and owes much of his success to having a size advantage over his opposition. Crawford, who's 40-0, keep in mind, 31 knockouts, says the fight with former IBF, WBA, and WBC 147 champ Spence, who's 28-1, 22 knockouts, is up in the air, put that in air quotes, due to the network situation. The 33-year-old Spence is with PBC, and their co-founder and CEO Al Heyman is reportedly looking for a platform to take as many fighters, including Spence, which reminds me, I need to get back to PBC. If they wind up moving to Amazon Prime, so it says this article, boxingnews24.com, it will be dicey whether the Crawford versus Spence rematch will sell. For a new platform that has never shown boxing events, it's reasonable to assume that the Crawford-Spence rematch will bomb and lose money. If fans have to purchase a membership on Amazon Prime in addition to the pay-per-view price to watch Crawford versus Spence rematch, keep in mind, that fight will do incredibly poor numbers. Without Spence taking a couple fights in between to rebuild his image with the fans to make them believe he has a chance against Crawford, the rematch will be a disaster for PBC and whatever network stages it. We signed to do a rematch, and that's what it is, said Terence Crawford. I don't have a date, but I know that the next fight is for Terence Crawford against Spence. It doesn't matter which network PBC takes the Albatross rematch. It will probably do poor numbers on pay-per-view. Boxing fans don't care about that because it's not their money that will be lost. The organizers of the Crawford-Spence rematch would be the ones going through the hardship. In a perfect world, the Saudis would take an interest in staging the rematch between Errol and Crawford and pay massive amounts of money to both fighters without worrying about whether it would be successful on pay-per-view or not. The Saudis probably won't even want to touch that hot potato, though, because of how one-sided the Spence-Crawford fight was last July. Even with a stacked undercard of A-side guys fighting D-side level opponents for the Crawford-Spence rematch card, like we saw with Tyson Fury versus Francis Ngannou in Saudi Arabia and the anti-Joshua Deontay Wilder event planned for December 23rd, the event will still likely do poor numbers. So, said Crawford, it's up in the air due to the fact that Showtime has decided not to do boxing. Nothing has been noted to me that the fight would not happen. The contract says 147, and that's where it'll be right now. We can decide on 154 or 147. He wants to prove to the world that he can defeat me in a rematch. I take my hat off to him, concluded Crawford. Let's take a quick look at what Bob Arum has to say. Shakur Stevenson, who we mentioned, is one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in boxing, but promoting a card on a Thursday night isn't ideal, even in the fight capital of the world, said Arum. The late start on the East Coast to this ESPN doubleheader, Steven and Edwin De Los Santos will headline 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time, won't help viewership either. This was what ESPN executive wanted, however. Therefore, Arum's Top Rank acquiesced to the needs of the cable giant, with which it has an exclusive content partnership. ESPN's license fees, which exceed $80 million each year, almost entirely fund Top Rank's budget for fights annually. Said Arum, we're not used to Thursday nights, but obviously ESPN has a great sports schedule, and they're bound and determined to do a boxing event the week of Formula One because a lot of their executives and sponsors will be in town. So we're doing it as an accommodation to them, says Arum, because like everything else in sports, the people who control the money get to call the shots. They're paying for it, aren't they? So, of course, you're going to do what they want. And let's give the last word to our good friends, Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren, who apparently have, as I said earlier in the show, buried their hatchet. They came face-to-face for the first time ever after years of bitter promotional feuding. The two boxing matchmakers are spent in age going at each other with verbal onslaughts on various platforms and in interviews. But the two have been brought together by Turki Al-Ashik of Saudi Arabia, who is putting on a huge event, as we all know, on December 23rd. It sees anti-Joshua, 34 years of age, fight Otto Wallin, 32, Deontay Wilder, who's 38, fighting against Joseph Parker, who's 31. Both Hearn and Warren are promoting the show, and fans were stunned as they shared the stage and even shared a laugh and joke. One said, wow, miracles do happen. Another added, Wilder and AJ shaking hands, Frank and Eddie laughing and joking. What a time to be alive. One commented, the face-off we all wanted. Take that two ways. Hearn admitted he was happy to see grudges put aside in the interest of business. He said, this was the first time I met Frank tonight, which is ridiculous, but I really think we all understand how good this is for our business, our fighters, and the sport. So there you have it, boxing fans, straight from the horse's mouth. I want to thank you for joining me here on Talkin Fight. Appreciate it very much. Remember to join me again at 11 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow when I'll have more news and headlines for you in the world of boxing. and we'll see you then.